I'm Cole Preston, and today I'm at Blue Island Beer Company for the premiere of my mini documentary on legalization policy in Illinois. I've been following cannabis policy since Colorful Colorado legalized it all the way back in the day, and when my home state of Illinois decided to legalize it, I just became enamored. I wondered, what would it actually look like? If you'd like to see how Illinois fell short in achieving meaningful reform in their cannabis policy, you can watch my mini doc now at colememo.com/minidoc.
So, Jeremy, thank you for sitting down with me again today. Before I have you introduce yourself, I just wanted to tell you a funny story. Unfortunately, I don't have the clip today, but
Mhm.
somebody actually caught the moment that in Springfield, Illinois, I recently went for the most recent legislative session, and I was standing outside of the press office, and you walked by, and I'm the
Hmm.
type of nerd that recognizes reporters. That's how nerdy I am. And I
Okay.
was like, "Oh shit, that's Jeremy." And I was really excited. I'd never seen you in person. We've, been on the podcast together. And this person got on video. They like looked at me and they could tell my gears were turning. They literally got me on video. Like you walk in and I like look at the door and I like look at other people and I just look at the door again and I'm like, I'm gonna go say hi to Jeremy.
Yeah.
You know? So it was just kind of funny because so yeah, went in. I wish I would have gotten a picture with you. It was just I was excited to just be there in general, but then to see you was also cool. So
No. It was nice meeting you as well. And you were with a group of people, if I recall, right?
yeah, yeah. I wasn't like I was I we aligned together. I wasn't, like with them. Most of those people were like lobbying for hemp businesses. I was just
Ah,
there as a hemp consumer because like I like, drink the drinks. I don't know if you've seen them at Benny's or whatever. There's
yes.
these, yeah.
Yes.
So I just love this newfound level of access. Like it's cool. Like for example, I got my grandma and my aunt to try cannabis for the first time. People I never, they never would have taken a puff off of a joint. I could never
Right.
convince them of that, but they were like, "Oh, a sip? I'll try a sip." And they're like, "Hmm." And then they
Yeah.
tried more. So it was anyways, I was there and it just a side note, Jeremy, I don't know if you'd find this interesting, but it seemed like some of the legislators that I spoke to found it refreshing to speak to me because whenever I would go in there, they'd be like, they'd get out a pen and paper. I was actually impressed with, when I'd like come in at the tail end of somebody else's meeting and they'd be like reciting the notes and like figures. They'd be like, "Oh, so this is if this legislation went through, it cost you this." Like, blah, blah. So they're really trying to understand the issues.
Yeah.
But when I went in there, so that's like a really a compliment to some of these legislators I went to. When I went in there, they're like, "All right," they'll flip their notepad and they're like, "So who are you representing today?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm just here. I'm just Cole. I'm not representing a business. I
Mm.
have concerns about, a level of access that I've been granted through this federal, farm bill, and I don't want it to go away type of thing." And they were like, "Wow, you're just a person here." And I was like, "Yeah, exactly." You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because I think, what you see and I've been on this beat, coming up on 3 years. And when they have committee hearings on these bills, the people who testify generally, I mean, it's all walks of life, but generally, you'll see lobbyists, you'll see experts in their field, like maybe people who represent, excuse me, like other interest groups. Sometimes you'll have everyday people, like if they, especially if there's criminal justice legislation, you may have victims of crime, for example. But I think obviously with cannabis being such a hot button issue since the governor, has been has been in charge, for 5.5 years. Certainly, that's something that resonates with a lot of everyday people. And like you said, it's attracting new consumers, like you were saying, your family members who are older, you would have never thought, would partake. with cannabis or cannabis related products. It's become something that, ordinary people, I think that a lot of these lawmakers have really been educated um, by this issue, not just by lobbyists, not by interest groups, but by ordinary people. And I think we saw that a lot too with the assault weapons ban,
Mhm.
where you had some lobbying, but in these hearings, which in some cases became pretty contentious, it was ordinary people who were really, driving the debate, so to speak. So those are just like parallels there that I've noticed.
Yeah, well said. Well, yeah, my last note on cannabis as we transition over to our subject matter for today is cannabis has been a gateway drug for me to politics. I've gotten very interested in the political process as a result of cannabis policy. And it's so, like you said, there are some analogies with, I think, this firearm policy we'll be talking about today, which is that, maybe, you could make the analogy that people that are very passionate about like that lifestyle or whatever, they get really involved in the policy. So let's just back up for a second. I wanted to formally introduce you and have you introduce yourself. Jeremy Gorner, thank you for joining me today. Displaying your Twitter right now. Wanted to give you the space to introduce yourself before we got into the subject matter today.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Jeremy Gorner. I am a reporter with for the Chicago Tribune. I am based out of the Illinois State Capitol, so I cover um, in Springfield. I cover the Illinois General Assembly and Governor J.B. Pritzker's administration. I cover really an array of issues. Really, whatever the issue of the day is for the General Assembly, it could be um, it could be, and that's also when we're not covering the legislature, because the legislature runs primarily from January through May, and then there's a couple of weeks in November where they come back to Springfield. But when I'm not doing that, a lot of the time, especially in election years, we're focusing on campaigns and elections. This has been an especially busy year for me. I had to cover I had the privilege rather to say I covered the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention. And it's obviously very rare. I'm a native Chicagoan, so it's very rare where you have where the way I see it, someone like me who covers state government and politics gets to cover two major national political conventions that are conventions that are essentially in my backyard. You had the RNC in Milwaukee, the DNC in Chicago. I don't think we're ever going to see that again for
Yeah, that was
a long
convenient.
time. So it's been a really busy year for that. But what I've learned, but that being said, this is a beat where I tend to shift gears a lot because of, like I said, we'll be covering elections one day, and then we'll go back to covering state government policy another day. And I think what we're going to talk about today with the assault weapons ban is just one facet of the beat that I've covered the last couple of years in Springfield. I mean, when I cover state government policy matters, that could range anything from the state budget to energy policy to to the environment, to education, to criminal justice matters. It's the last couple of years, criminal justice matters have really really gained a lot of attention because of the passage of the Safety Act, which includes the elimination of cash bail. And then of course, when tragedies strike, like what happened in Highland Park a couple of years ago, the mass shooting at the Fourth of July parade, that resulted in the assault weapons ban. And what we've seen unfold in Springfield is a lot of controversy, between gun rights groups and gun control advocates who obviously are fighting to keep this law in place. And that's all come to a head this week in a federal courtroom in East St. Louis, where a number of gun rights advocates who had filed a lawsuit were trying to, basically, lawyers on behalf of those advocates were trying to plead their case on why they feel this assault weapons ban should be struck down.
Gotcha. Yeah, and what were some of those reasons, if you don't mind getting into that, why they feel it should be struck down? And I'm guessing the state either has responded or has to issue a response or
No, they
something like.
have.
Okay.
They have. There was a trial this week, but I mean, generally the arguments have not changed. ever since the legal challenges started pouring in a year and a half ago, which is, I think, let's start there,
Sure.
to kind of, give you a sense of where we ended up right now, where we've ended up right now. So, or I'll go back to 2022. Obviously, Highland
Yeah.
Park, Illinois, there was a 4th of July parade, and a mass shooting occurred at the parade. 7 people were killed. Dozens more were injured. There was an arrest made in that in that mass shooting, and Robert Cremo III is the defendant in that case. He's still awaiting trial, and there were a lot of questions surrounding how he was able to. He obtained the gun that he used, uh, which was a Smith and Wesson M&P 15 rifle, was a legal purchase. He obtained it um, within the last couple of years before that, using a firearm owner's identification card. For people who don't know, in Illinois, in order to make a lawful purchase of a gun, you must have a FOID card in order to do that. With FOID cards, in order to obtain one, a background check is conducted on an individual for them to obtain one. This was a case where authorities allege that his father, Cremo's father, had helped him um, get this FOID card somehow, even though in the months before that, and this was around 2019, um, local police had or police had paid visits to Cremo's home, where they over reports that he had threatened to kill people, or that he had threatened to kill himself. And whenever something like that happens, according to authorities, a what's called a clear and present danger report must be filed to the Illinois State Police. That happened in this case, um, but what happened was is that for whatever reason, that report was not retained by the state police, because at the time, state police had a policy, or they really basically, Cremo did not have a FOID card application on file, um, and nor did he have a pending application, and the state police determined that he wasn't considered an imminent threat, so they did not retain that clear and present danger report. And then fast forward to early 2020, he's able to get a FOID card with the help of his father, and according to authorities. So he obtains this gun legally. And then after the shooting in 2022, there was a big push by gun control advocates to to institute an assault weapons ban, or a ban on certain semi-automatic, high-powered semi-automatic guns. This could be pistols, rifles, pistols, rifles, and shotguns, mainly rifles, and some high-capacity magazines. And when I say high-capacity magazines, what the state defines as high capacity is anything that's more than 10 rounds for long guns and more than 15 rounds for handguns. So in January 2023, the Illinois General Assembly passed this weapons ban, and Governor Pritzker signs it into law. And then that's when the legal challenges just started coming. Groups like the Illinois State Rifle Association, Federal Firearms Licensees of Illinois. That's an advocacy group in Illinois for gun dealers, and the National Shooting Sports Foundation. That's probably I think, it's maybe the flagship, or the main premier firearm trade industry organization in the country right now. Organizations like that filed lawsuits, and among others. So since then, most of these legal challenges have been unsuccessful. There were some legal challenges on the state level that the assault weapons ban violated the state constitution. That didn't go anywhere. They've tried at the federal level, and there was temporary success, but then the Seventh Circuit overturned it, overturned those rulings. So I'll get more specific on that because that's what matters here. Several of those groups that I had mentioned before, like the National Shooting Sports Foundation, the State Rifle Association, etc., and others, filed these legal challenges in federal court, including in the Southern District of Illinois. And so last year, maybe a couple months after Pritzker signed the ban into law, a federal judge in the Southern District of Illinois sided with plaintiffs in granting a preliminary injunction that would block the enforcement of the assault weapons ban temporarily while the main legal challenges are kind of unfolding or pending. Basically, what that meant, and this was in April 2023, is that this judge felt that the law likely violated the Second Amendment, basically the right to bear arms and the right of self-defense. And in what was at issue in this decision making largely was a landmark 2022 case before the U.S. Supreme Court. It's called New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruen. And basically, in this decision in 2022, the Supreme Court established like a new constitutional standard, holding that gun laws today shall be historically consistent with laws on the books in the 18th century. So one of the gun rights groups cited this historical tradition test to contend that the ban on these guns is too broad because it prohibits guns that are commonly used by law-abiding citizens. I think that the National Shooting Sports Foundation, for instance, they noted that there's more than 24 million so-called modern sporting rifles in circulation in the U.S. since, that have been in circulation since the 1990s. And this includes many AR-15 and AK-47 models that are subject to the Illinois ban. And oh, by the way, and the gun that was used in the Highland Park mass shooting, the Smith & Wesson M&P 15, was also on the list as a banned weapon per the Illinois assault weapons ban. But yeah, so because of this, historical tradition test, this was passed by the 6-3 conservative majority in the U.S. Supreme Court, by the way. And so that goes to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals, that decision on the preliminary injunction. And the Seventh Circuit disagrees in a 2-1 decision. And, basically what the Seventh Circuit had said is that there's really limitations on the Second Amendment, is basically what it says. After the judge in the Southern District of Illinois, Stephen McGlynn, ruled in favor of this preliminary injunction to temporarily put the halt on the assault weapons ban. The Seventh Circuit found that the quote is that at least since the founding, there has been an unbroken tradition of regulating weapons, end quote, to protect public safety, and that state and local laws at issue should quote unquote stay within those boundaries. So basically, they're saying that the government has a responsibility to protect people, and that would include, in so many words, and that would include regulating, weapons, certain firearms. There was a lone dissenter in that Seventh Circuit decision who basically, called the majority decision in the Seventh Circuit a remarkable conclusion, saying that these banned weapons and attachments, basically the conclusion was, by the Seventh Circuit, the majority, is that they don't qualify as arms that fall under the Second Amendment. But this dissenter, it's Judge Michael Brennan in the Seventh Circuit, he's found that they do warrant constitutional protection. So what happened from there, that was last November. In early July, there was still more legal wrangling, and there was a question on, whether the U.S. Supreme Court is going to take up this case. Early July, right as the Supreme Court session ends, Justice Clarence Thomas obviously a member of the High Court's conservative majority. He basically said that, look, we're not going to take up the case yet because it's only in its preliminary stages. But he really gave kind of a preview of how he felt about the Illinois law. He said, quote, "In my view, Illinois' ban is highly suspect because it broadly prohibits common semi-automatic firearms used for lawful purposes. It is difficult to see how the Seventh Circuit could have concluded that most of the widely known semi-automatic rifles are not arms protected by the Second Amendment." And basically, what this ruling from the Supreme Court, what Thomas wrote is that, he says that the Supreme Court should take up this case after it goes through a trial on its merits, which is what happened this week in East St. Louis, before that same judge last year who issued the preliminary injunction. Because what happens is that, parties involved in who are challenging a law, they want a preliminary injunction. It goes through that phase before going through the trial on its merits, which is where, you know, where a judge will hear more evidence and more testimony to kind of bolster, for each side to try to bolster their arguments on whether a law should stay in place or whether it should be struck down. So that's what happened this week. The this and that's what happened this week, and in I guess a decision from the judge in the Southern District, Stephen McGlynn. It probably will come in a few weeks, maybe in the next month, and we're going to start the process all over again. Basically, that if the gun rights advocates don't win this challenge, then I'm sure they're going to appeal it. Obviously, whoever loses is definitely going to appeal this to the Seventh Circuit, and Seventh Circuit again, and then who knows what could happen from there if the Seventh Circuit, like in a scenario like if this judge sides with the gun rights advocates, it's pretty. I'm sure that the Illinois Attorney General will appeal that to the Seventh Circuit, and if the Seventh Circuit were to side with the Attorney General, then this could be appealed all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Wow. That's interesting. And as we spoke about last time,
I hope that was easy to follow, Cole. I'm sorry. I hope I wasn't going all.
No, I appreciate you going into it, and there is a lot of details, and I may have to revisit it, and I might, if I butcher any details, feel free to, like jump in here. But like we were talking about last time, first of all, you did a great job, I think, of laying it out. But like we talked about last time, it sounds like that's what firearm rights activists or advocates are hoping for, is it to go to the Supreme Court. Do you think that's their hope, at least because they see that the Supreme Court as being like favorable to the cause, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they probably any avenue that would allow Illinoisans to legally carry guns that are now illegal under the state's assault weapons ban, which, by the way, is formally called the Protect Illinois Communities Act.
Right.
They
Or
want that
PICA,
overturned.
sometimes they call it, right?
I think one thing that I should note, though, too, is that what I was told by one of the gun rights advocates is that is basically that there are a couple of cases out there nationally that could be considered by other courts. I know there's a case out of Maryland that's challenging, I believe, that's challenging their gun ban. That's a case that could potentially go before the Supreme Court at some point. And that could be, I know that gun rights folks have looked at that as kind of an option as opposed to the Illinois ban going to the U.S. Supreme Court. But I don't think we should get ahead of ourselves. There hasn't been any kind of ruling from a judge on this. And as far as gun control advocates go, they're pretty, they've been maintaining that this is a law that is constitutional. What the distinction that they're trying to draw is between weapons that are used for civilians and weapons that are used for military use. And they feel that there's an argument to be made that that these are weapons of war and that they should be outlawed, which was really the impetus for the General Assembly passing this legislation and Pritzker signing it into law. And of course, the Attorney General's been trying to back up that point repeatedly, with case law, for any legal challenges that come before it.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it'll be interesting. Like you said, it sounds like, if Illinoisans don't get it somehow to the Supreme Court, maybe another state could, because these types of gun control measures are being taken up in, different states, like you said, Maryland, California. I actually don't know many others than that off the top of my head. Maybe you
No,
do.
those are the two. Those
Okay.
are the main ones, but I think Maryland is the one where it appears that there's more of a direct pipeline to the Supreme Court that could happen.
Hmm.
So yeah.
Gotcha. Gotcha.
Mhm.
I'm curious, there was a question and I actually can play just a moment of it since it's a short one, and then I can ask my question. I thought this was an interesting one. This came to, on the campaign trail to presidential candidate Kamala Harris. I'll play the question and then kind of ask my question. I thought it was an interesting one.
Mhm.
Again,
Okay.
quick question. I want to talk to you about gun control. So, you've said you support an assault weapons ban and universal background checks, and we actually learned during the debate that you are a gun owner. But in cities like Philadelphia, handguns are responsible for most homicides and violent crime. The most recent FBI data shows handguns were involved in 59% of murders in our country. How will you address the issue of the use of handguns? Because a push for an assault weapons ban only addresses a significant but small part of the problem.
So I'm not obviously asking you this question. I was actually kind of wondering if maybe you've heard similar to their question, and I don't know if you've thought of this angle. I just thought of it on the phone with you. So, Chicago, and I know this is kind of a talking point from maybe some of those firearm advocates. They'll
Sure.
say Chicago has these tight gun control measures, yet we see this proliferation of guns in Chicago. My question actually is not about the pistols or anything else about that. My question's actually like, without revealing my sources, I've heard from several firearm advocates that it's relatively easy to get around this assault weapons ban. Have you done any like investigation on that? So for example, like the only thing it seems like the assault weapons or the PICA Act is restricting is these lower receivers, which when you get down to brass tacks, one time I was stoned talking to one of these firearm advocates and they're like, it's just a piece of metal, man. And I'm like, damn, that's kind of true. We can't like,
Talking about the switches, right?
well, not only switches, but the lower receivers for
Oh,
to
okay.
build a
Yeah.
rifle.
Sorry.
And so they were
Yeah.
saying like that what they were telling me was like, you can either make one yourself, which kind of reminded me of grow your own weed, or they
Yeah.
said it's relatively easy to still get one. And then what they do is they just go over to Indiana and they can buy all of the other parts without a background check. So
Yep.
you get all you have to get is the lower, and then they go build the rest of the rifle with parts from Indiana, and then come back to Illinois. And
Yeah. So yeah. So what else? I think you're talking about what gun control activists call ghost guns. I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
like guns that, or really it's guns that are non-serialized, I mean, or guns that are homemade. So, General Assembly, Illinois passed a law, I believe it was last year, or the year before. I think it might have been last year. It was in the last couple of years outlawing ghost guns or non-serialized or out along these like homemade guns. And for those that already exist that are in circulation in Illinois, they must be sent to a federal firearms dealer to actually get serialized. But from now on, for all intents and purposes, they are you know, that is the law of the land, at least in Illinois, that they are banned. Now, are there ways around that? I mean, I'm sure there are. I mean, what I could tell you is, I haven't seen statistics, but I know that in 2021, so I used to cover the Chicago Police Department, and right before I switched beats to cover the State House, I did a story. I looked at statistics of gun recoveries by the Chicago Police Department in 2021. And what I could tell you is that there was a negligible number of guns that were recovered from Chicago's streets that were non-serialized or that were deemed ghost guns. Of course, but at the time, that number was growing. Now, keep in mind, every year, and let's use Chicago as an example. CPD recovers thousands of guns, of illegal guns off the streets, right? Obviously, handgun violence is what's fueling firearm violence in the city. Um, and the number of those non-serialized guns or ghost guns were very negligible that were recovered. They were in like the double digits, I believe. But I would imagine, double digits, and then I think they ended up in the triple digits. But I would imagine that they are growing in popularity. I'd be interested because I know that in 2021, what the police were telling me is that they had been seeing more of that. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, and then there's this
Um,
I can't say the word, proliferation of
yeah.
3D printing, and it's gotten a lot
Yes.
better, and it's becoming like home grow, where it's like you can do it in your basement and nobody knows. And it's like,
Right.
whoa. And then like
Right.
some of these, that's kind of where my question was coming from. It's like, with bans, sometimes, especially if we've learned with drugs, like bans just make people that really want it find a different way. And yeah, like I said, this proliferation of like 3D printed guns, it's kind of exploding. And I think it's a whole, I don't know if you know where this stands. This might be a topic for another episode. But it's interesting because some of these people are arguing, well, we're sharing code for something that's being printed. That's freedom of speech. So they're
Hmm.
like circumventing. It's like, well, I'm not making the gun. I'm just sharing
Right.
code,
Right.
And it's like, wow, this whole thing is just really unraveled.
Right. And I will say so far I have not seen any at least known legal challenges to the ghost gun ban
Hmm.
in Illinois, at least yet. But that being said, I know it, and then the firearms advocates will say, well, look at Illinois. They've got, the strictest gun laws in the country, like you're among the strictest. And, you hear that argument all the time. And there are, I mean, you know, I guess comparatively so, especially to the surrounding states in the Midwest. That's absolutely true. At the same time, if you look at some of these other states, and the clip you were showing me talked about universal background checks, and I mean, obviously, if you buy a gun at a gun dealer, you need to fill out a 4473. For there to be a background check on the federal level for a legal gun purchase. But if you want to resell that gun if you want to do a private sale with somebody, not every state has background checks on private sales, and that's another issue. Like I mean, in Illinois, under the Floyd Act, if you sell your gun in a private, if you, it's my understanding that if you sell your gun in a private sale, um, you know, after you make a legal purchase from a gun shop, maybe a few years later you want to sell it to somebody else, you got to see the other person's FOID card and keep but if you don't, I believe that the penalty is only a misdemeanor. I mean,
Yeah.
it doesn't really have any teeth.
And I think they
Um,
even have like some paper process where you like
yes.
that you're formally, I don't know, I've never had to do that. Brief tangent, just while it's on my mind, and since cannabis sometimes comes up, that's currently the only way that cannabis users can legally purchase a firearm. Otherwise, they would be committing like a Hunter Biden-esque crime. And I'm only saying it that way
Mm,
because he's recently in the news for
yeah,
lying on that
of
same
course.
question. And it's just interesting because obviously with rescheduling on the cusp and maybe changes in cannabis policy, that things would change. But I'm just saying that as of now, if we instituted universal background checks, that would mean cannabis users would not have the right to purchase firearms because they wouldn't be able to, you know, legally pass that background check. Again, just small tangent that,
No, that's interesting. I mean,
yeah,
that's interesting. I mean, and again, I mean, it's not much of an issue for Illinois in that,
right.
there's a law in the books that requires, a background check among private sales. But again, the penalty for that is relatively minor. And there's other states like Wisconsin, for example, you don't need to do a background check on private sales. I mean, and I would imagine that's the same for other states that are, that don't have as strict gun laws as Illinois. But I mean, but that being said, there's a lot of ways that guns get, a lot of these guns you figure have to originate with a lawful purchase. Question is, how do they end up on the streets? And a lot of that is, law enforcement suspects they know how it happens. They bring up straw purchasing as a big reason for it. And I remember 10 years ago hearing this explanation from Chicago police leaders that this was a big, a big catalyst for guns ending up on the streets. But you don't really see prosecutors on the state or federal levels charging people with gun running or charges that are, resulting from straw purchasing. It's a very hard crime to prove, it seems.
Mm.
And then of course, the lax gun laws from neighboring states like or less strict gun laws from neighboring states like Wisconsin and Indiana are to blame.
Dude.
Of course, if you look at a lot of where these guns come from that are recovered in Chicago
Mhm.
by police, a lot of them end up from legal purchases in Cook County. So it's it's a crime, proving tracing guns, to their origin has proven to be, a difficult endeavor for law enforcement. And CPD, I know local law enforcement, including CPD, they work with the ATF on this, and it's not so it seems like it's a never-ending fight to figure, to wrap their heads around that. But at the same time, you know, yeah, and then of course there's just so many guns that are in circulation that, where just enough fall through the cracks to create a dangerous environment for people on the streets, in places like Chicago, in parts of Chicago. Um, so yeah, but at the same time, that kind of jumped out. Like we go back to universal background checks.
Mhm.
That is what kind of jumped out at me, with the Kamala Harris interview. Is that, yeah? I mean, not all states. If you had that, then every state on a private sale, every state would require these on private sales, and we just don't see that.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost, I'm glad I let you finish that point. I almost cut you off because you made me think of something funny. I just took a note so I wouldn't forget. You're talking about the lax gun, firearm policy in Indiana, and it's funny. I'm working on a story. If you can't tell, we'll see if it ever comes out. Because you know how that goes, right? When you work on
Sure,
got to do
absolutely.
the long game. But
Yeah.
I was, with some firearm advocates. We went to an Indiana gun store, and I was kind of blown away at the difference. I don't know if you've ever been, but this was an armory. And first of all, the door was just open. Like, have you ever been to a bar where they just keep the door open? Like, come on, come
Yes.
in. The door was just open. Like, even dispensaries have like a buzzing system. The door was just open. I walked in, I like tripped over some guns. I'm joking. But literally, like, I mean, it wasn't very far in, and none of the guns, most of the guns rather, I think all the expensive ones were behind the counter, but most of the firearms were just
Mhm.
out. They weren't even like locked. Like I could just pick them up and be like, yeah, like, and I'm just trying to point out how different it is from Illinois. It honestly reminds me of going to an Illinois dispensary versus a Michigan dispensary, where in Illinois dispensaries, everything is locked up behind the counter, but Michigan
Mhm.
dispensaries, it's all out in jars. You can like go up and smell it, look at
Mhm.
it real close, like it's just completely open, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and that's how
Yeah.
it was in Indiana. I was like, wow. It is, like
Yeah.
you said, it is very lax in Indiana. It was like almost
Right.
unbelievable.
Right. Right.
The
Right.
door
And
being open was just like, I don't know. That just seemed crazy to me.
right. Right.
Just
Right.
wide
Well.
open.
Well. To your point, and I'd like to bring up 2 points that
Sure.
relate to that I think relate to your point. One thing that I've been reading is that uh So I did a story earlier this month. I don't know if you saw it, where there was a federal judge in Rockford ruled it unconstitutional for Illinois residents with concealed carry permits to be prohibited from carrying guns on public transportation. And so it's kind of uncertain what that's going to do. This pertains to the 2013 concealed carry law in Illinois. Illinois was the last state to pass such a law, allowing for concealed carry or guns in public, with a permit. When that law was passed, there were all these conditions that are in place to this day where you cannot carry concealed weapons, hospitals, schools, sports arenas, and public transportation. And so there was a lawsuit filed in Rockford where a judge ruled that unconstitutional because and we'll see what happens with it. I mean, the Attorney General's office says the state Attorney General's office says that they're going to appeal it. They kind of downplayed the ruling a little bit, saying it only applies to the 4 plaintiffs in the case, but the lawyer for the plaintiffs told me that he thinks that one could argue that it applies more broadly, but there hasn't been a final judgment on that. But that is a case that I would pay attention to, because that is, again, like, in my earlier rambling about this New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin case, this historical tradition test on firearm regulation that I'm talking about. That's the centerpiece of that's like a large part, I should say, of the assault weapons ban trial. That's also a factor in this Rockford case as well. So that's definitely something to pay attention to. That's my first point. My second point is that given that Illinois was like the last state to adopt a law like this, 10 years ago, what you're seeing now is that you're seeing a number of states that are moving towards constitutional carry where or permitless carry of firearms. So
Right.
that's, another thing, when you talk about Indiana, I'm not sure if Indiana has constitutional carry. I have to check, but yeah, other states, have moved in that direction. I believe for the longest time, Vermont was like the only state that had that regulation, but other states have followed suit in the last 10 years.
Yeah. The thing about open or the carrying laws that's interesting is like in Colorado, for example, you can open carry, but yeah, conceal carry, you have to have like a permit. It is interesting how like, it seems like these, yeah, that idea of no permit required is really seemingly catching on. And it sounds like, if I understood what you're saying correctly, they're taking that idea of the 1800s standard and applying it now to pistols, saying like, well, hey, I mean, people always had a pistol on their hip back in the day.
Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Or there's no law back then that really, yeah. Right. I mean, it was common use now,
Mhm.
Was common use yeah, exactly.
Gotcha. Cool. Well, any other bases, it sounds like the future is uncertain. But we've touched on a few different nuances. And thank you, by the way, for getting into like just I always like discussing, some of these analogs between, how we ban firearms versus, drugs, and how like other state policies can sometimes make those initiatives, they can complicate them. How about that? I feel like that's the most neutral way to say it.
Right.
So,
Right.
Any other bases you wanted to touch on these stories that we hadn't though?
No, I mean, that's pretty much it. I know
Cool.
that, one of the things I think, like, one of the things I will also say is that, I worked on a story about, during the Democratic National Convention, looking at the 1994 crime bill, the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. This was under the Clinton administration. It was a response to just the wave of street violence we saw in America in the 1990s. And as part of that, it was the 30th anniversary this year of that law. And it's been controversial in that, a lot of criminal justice reformers believe that, it fueled a culture of mass incarceration because it advocated for stiffer prison sentences for certain crimes. And it also came with a goal under the Clinton administration of, hiring 100,000 more police officers by the end of the 90s. And, a lot of those officers are retiring now or have since retired. But as it relates to this discussion, Cole, the other thing that came out of the crime bill was the 10-year federal assault weapon ban. And what you're seeing now from on the Democrats' platform that came out during the DNC is they really want a renewal of the federal assault weapons ban. I mean, they apparently in the last couple of years, during the Biden years, not the Trump years. I mean, I believe it was 2022, the U.S. House passed the federal ban on assault weapons, and then it didn't make it through the Senate. So this is obviously something that's top of mind for Democratic lawmakers, but at the same time, we've seen a Congress that is probably as divided as we'll ever see it. I mean, if it's not 51-49 or 50-50, it's pretty damn close, right?
Yeah.
So, getting something like that passed, is going to be a tall order, but that seemed to be, at least during the Biden administration, really kind of a rallying cry to kind of renew that ban. But it's not, but this isn't 1994 where you're likely to see, some Republicans cross over to the other side of the aisle and support something like that. We're obviously in a very different political climate.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to end the show with giving a shout out to some of your fellow reporters, but I wanted to on a really awesome series of stories they're doing right now. And I think maybe even you might be helping, so you can tell us. But before we do that, I just wanted to see if you've heard any responses to this, because this is one of the things that, as a left-leaning person, as somebody who believes in like responsible firearm policy, like um, this is one of the things that has given me pause from the firearm advocates. It's like, and I'm curious if you've heard any responses to this, what I think is a talking point. It's this idea that, like, I think you'd said it earlier, this idea that weapons for civilians versus weapons for the military. And as a left-leaning person that has, passions in drug policy and everything else, I tend not to trust the police. But this does make it so that only police can continue to buy these firearms and have these firearms. And as a left-leaning person, that really gave me pause. They were like, so on one hand, you're saying you're very skeptical of the police. And I'm not one of those people that's like, F the police. I'm not that type of person. I'm skeptical, and I want them to prove themselves, because they've had a, bad track record. And so it's like, I do get nervous when we talk about only them having access to these militaries that we're describing as military use. Have you heard any like people respond to that talking point, or is that even a talking point you've heard much of in this debate?
Well, I will tell you what I have heard. What I have heard related to what I think is related to what you said is that, I said earlier in your show about how there have been legal challenges on the state and federal level. Of course, the
Mhm.
assault weapons ban trial this week, that's a federal case, and that's the main thing
Yeah.
that's what we should all be paying attention to. However, on the state level, there were series of lawsuits challenging, alleging that the assault weapons ban violated the Illinois Constitution. And one of the
Right.
big arguments that the gun rights advocates were bringing up is this idea that I forget what the legal term is, but in the assault weapons ban, there are
So like a
there are
special class or something?
there's special class. There are exemptions, and that includes police officers. That includes military. I believe it includes retired military. I mean, it's just there's a whole list, prison wardens, stuff like that. And I know, like, you were talking about how you're left leaning. when it comes to gun policy, but even like, more right-leaning advocates were saying this is why it should be ruled unconstitutional because, you're basically giving favoritism to one class over another class through these exemptions. Of course, the Illinois Supreme Court, which is left-leaning, didn't go for that. So I think um, it's a very interesting. I think that that's kind of if I've heard anything related to what you just said, Cole, that's probably the main thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And ironically, it was the Illinois Supreme Court, which has more Democrats on it, that you know still kept the ban in place.
And and yeah,
And
that's
sided with Attorney General Raul on the issue.
yeah, that's kind of where, like I said, I wasn't necessarily expecting an answer, but it's like, yeah, it seems like the left is pushing for only the police, and these types of people to have it, and but on the other hand, they're also saying like, there's been protests and everything that have been left leaning, like kind of skeptical of the police, and so it's like, are we like, what are we doing here? It almost feels like
Well,
inconsistent.
well, what I will say is like the issue that you bring up too, and again, this was I haven't really researched or done reporting on this in years, but
Hmm.
the issue it sounds like you're kind of sort of touching on is this idea of the militarization of police departments.
Right, right.
And I will say, and I can only speak of Chicago, I don't think that was a thing in the Chicago Police Department as much as others. I mean, I think you see they have armored trucks, like they have armored vehicles that go to SWAT responses, these MRAP vehicles. I mean, but they don't have very many of them. I mean, this was as of a couple of years ago. I don't know what their fleet is now. Um, I do remember there was a push. I mean, CPD, depending on at some crime scenes, have officers who will carry rifles. I remember there was, but you know, I remembered that there was a big push for CPD officers to carry rifles after I was told, as I remember, um, that around 2008, 2009. Do you remember the terror attacks in Mumbai?
Mhm.
Yeah, and after that, um, you know, the CPD leadership basically had allowed and arranged for more officers, crime scenes to carry rifles. I remember hearing that there were problems with some of those rifles, but and I don't really think that that was something that was permanent, but you have seen waves over the years of this quasi-military presence on the street of local law enforcement, and that's one example as to why. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't really in Chicago historically, I don't believe that Chicago's been, as visible with that as other jurisdictions have been.
Yeah. Well, thank you for talking about all these things and more. And like I said, I just wanted to close the show with a quick shout out for some of your fellow reporters. And I just want to say before we move on to this, folks, as always, the stories we've talked about today will be in the show notes. I might ask you, Jeremy, to send me some of those articles you referenced, over the years, if you have them handy. If not, I can easily
Okay,
find them.
sure.
Just so that I can, if people want to read up on your work. But I wanted to give a shout out to the Chicago Tribune, also to the 21st Show, will.illinois.edu for collaborating with the Chicago Tribune on this podcast episode that I'm sharing right now is great. If you want to listen to it to get a feel for what this series that we're about to just briefly discuss is called, but I want you all to check out the Chicago Tribune's new series called Culture of Corruption, and I'll have it linked in our show notes. There's been a few different stories that have come out, and I believe Ray Long is on this. Jeremy, are you involved
I'm
in?
not, no,
Okay,
no,
cool.
no, but yeah, they've been doing a great job on that. It's and Ray Long, Rick Pearson, to name a few. I mean, these were longtime State House reporters, and they've you know covered this stuff for a very long time. So yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah. So shout out to them. We'll have that in the show notes. Check that out. It's very insightful. We won't start talking about it now because we'd be on a phone call for another hour, Jeremy. So But again, I want to thank you for what you do. I know that I have a feeling that sometimes maybe, as I told you, I think in Springfield that maybe your job might be thankless. I hope it's not, but if in case it is, I wanted to make sure to thank you for what you do because it's important work. So,
Thanks, Cole. Appreciate it.
yeah.
Likewise to you as well.
Oh, hey, thank you. That means the world to me. And folks, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. There's a lot of good knowledge on this. Like I said, I'm gonna have to listen back to it to completely understand this because it's a really fast evolving thing. And yeah, check out the show notes if you want to dig deeper. We'll see you on the next episode of the Cole Memo. Everybody, take care.